Okay, everyone, it is the top of the hour, so I want to go ahead and get this kicked off. I know Joseph has a great number of things he wants to show you, and so I don't want to take any time away from him. A few housekeeping items. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video to conserve bandwidth, if you will. Also, I have put in the chat window how you might access your AGO account for the exercise that Dr. Kursky will share with you. In addition, the hub for the entire conference I've placed in the chat window as well. If you have questions or you need information, please go to the chat window. I'll be monitoring the chat window throughout the presentation to try to curate those questions. Speaking of which, who am I? I am Rodney Jackson. I am a senior researcher at the National Geospatial Technology Center of Excellence, or the Geotech Center. I will be the moderator for this presentation. We are recording the presentation, and every presentation for the conference can be and will be shared with the attendees and for anyone for that matter. And so, so please be cognizant of that, and you can look at this again once you've gone through the presentation and want to see it again to relive the memories and whatnot. You can do that at your pleasure. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the presenter for today, our speaker, Dr. Joseph Kursky. Dr. Joseph Kursky is a geographer with a focus on the use of GIS in education. He holds 3 degrees in geography and has worked in the federal government for the U.S. Census Bureau, the USGS, as well as NOAA, at various universities as an instructor within private industry, where he currently works as the education manager for ESRI, and also for nonprofit organizations such as the National Council for Geographic Education. He has served as president for the NCGE and also gave a TED Talk on the whys of where. If you haven't seen that, it's something I would highly recommend. Not only that, in his spare time, he has created 5,000 or more videos, 750 lessons, 1,000 blog essays, authored over 75 chapters, and 7 books on GIS and related topics. And he generally makes me feel very tired and inadequate whenever I look at his bio. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, here is Dr. Joseph Kursky.
Greetings all. Thanks, Rodney. Much appreciated. Thanks for the kind words. But truly, the Geotech Center, GeoEd community is one of my favorite communities. I wish we were all together face-to-face as usual, but this is the next best thing. And actually, in some ways, it's a tad bit better because we can open it up to a bigger community. Although, obviously, I wish we weren't in the circumstances that we are in right now. This session is actually, speaking of the current circumstances that you all are in, upheaval in higher education and in other areas of education, makes this session, I believe, even more important than in normal times, because there are viable, relevant, powerful, and yet easy to use tools inside ArcGIS Online. So you've got that whole nothing to install, works on any device, advantages that we'll talk about here in the next 5 hours. Just kidding, we don't have that long together. We just have a short time together. While I'm going through a couple of setting the stage slides, feel free to log into your ArcGIS Online organizational account or the one that Rodney provided there, because I realize that there's going to be some people here that just want to kind of watch and soak in some of the tools that I'm going to run you through, and there are going to be other people that want to try it while we're working. And there's going to be still a third audience that's going to be watching this video, and kind of like you watching Bob's sync video, you're going to pause it and play that part back. So we've got 3 different needs, and I'm hoping to accommodate all of them. And also, as Rodney said, you know how to get a hold of me, so if there's any guidance or tips, or I'd love to get your feedback as to how you're using these tools in your own programs and courses. So I'm available, and I would love to keep in touch with you going forward. I hope you'll join me tomorrow. Actually, I'm going to have this presentation on day 2 of the conference, Charting a GIS Education Course. Get Get it? Charting a course for 2030. So I'm going to lay out some progress to date in GIS and education, and also issue some challenges for us as the community to think about as we go through the next decade together. So please join me for that. This tab right here, this is in our GeoNet ESRI community, and I posted this yesterday about the keynote address for tomorrow is sitting up there as a story map. You knew I'd probably give it with a story map, didn't you? And yes, it is there. The link is there in case you're not able to watch it live. But also the slides for today's workshop, the workshop that we're in right now, the slides are here as well as an attachment on the GeoNet post, and I'll put that URL in here into the chat box right now if you don't mind. So you'll have that to you as well. And as Rodney said, this is recorded as well, so you're going to be able to watch this in the recorded fashion. Okay. I'm so excited that you're here. Welcome. And if you've got questions, Rodney is going to field those to me. He's going to interrupt me as needed. We'll also have some time at the end for questions and answers. All right. Super. One of the things that I wanted to just lay out before you is that many of you are instructors, so you probably face the same kind of challenge on a daily basis as I do, faced with any sort of course or workshop. You know, what do you put in and what do you take out? So what I've done here in this workshop is I want you to put your educator hats on if you were called upon to teach a similar kind of content for, let's say, business faculty and students, or health, or other disciplines besides your own, besides geography, environmental science, planning, GIS, etc. How would you structure it? How would you do that? So you're going to be taking in some content. Hopefully there'll be some new things, even though I know we have very experienced GIS instructors here on the session today. But taking this, okay, maybe for those people that are new to GIS, new to location analytics, maybe I would focus on 1, 2, and 3 as you see here in the outline. Maybe I do this 5 simple but powerful spatial analytical tools, and maybe for another audience I would delve into some of the deeper dives that we will go into in number 4 there. So this is the outline that I've got here, and again, you're welcome to modify as you see fit for your own needs. But I'd like to just kind of start with the top level. What do we mean by spatial analysis, and go into a little bit of the data discussions, a little bit of the teaching instructional standpoint, some of the tools themselves, and guide you through there, again, which you can go through in interactive mode, or pausing and replaying the pieces of the video, or just kind of hanging back and watching as I go through some of these things. Well, that's the plan. Now, threading throughout the workshop, since I know that many of you are educators, is we're going to talk about, okay, well, why and how would I teach this, right? It's never just about the tools, right? We're always teaching several other things at the same time. Spatial thinking, critical thinking, working with data, media fluency, and all of the rest of it. And we're also teaching presentation skills, and we're also thinking how we're going to assess student work, and how we're going to approach this if we have 2 hours or 3 hours or a whole week on topic A. So those are the things that I want to thread throughout here. In other words, it's not just here are the tools, right? If that was all there was, we wouldn't be so in need of ongoing workshops and networking, right? We're all about the how do you teach this in an effective way, and also a little bit of how do I use this in my own research projects as well. I'm going to cancel my video just to save a little bit on the bandwidth. But if I get too animated and excited, I'll put it back on. But you know what I look like, and again, I'm happy that you're here. And this is a bit of what I was reflecting on a moment ago, that we have these GIS objectives, right, that we want to teach. We have these content objectives. We have thinking objectives. The content objectives, of course, change with you going across campus to the School of Business or the School of Health or the School of Civil Engineering. But whatever the content objectives are, those always work their way into our GIS instruction, right? It's never just about the buttonology. It's never just about how to buffer and how to overlay, and that these thinking objectives are important as well. There are several definitions for spatial thinking and spatial analysis, and I postulated about 10 years ago my own definition of spatial thinking, and I stand by it. It's served me well over the years, and perhaps it'll be useful to you as well. But identifying, analyzing, and understanding, so the three-part verbs there, identifying, analyzing, and understanding, and then the location, scale, patterns, and trends, okay? And then the geographic and the temporal relationships, right? We're all about the relationships among data, phenomena, and issues. That is my own definition of spatial thinking, but there are other good ones out there. The ESRI definition of spatial analysis, which is related to spatial thinking. We could talk about the differences perhaps in the chat, but the poster that I will share in a moment talks about the process of examining the locations, attributes, and relationships. So locations, right, the G part of GIS, the attributes, the I part of GIS, and relationships, I like to think about it as the S part of GIS, the thing that brings together the map, either a 2D or a 3D map, into the attributes and allows us to look at the relationships, patterns, and trends, as I had in the spatial thinking definition, of features in spatial data. So we're talking about geographic data through overlay and other analytical techniques in order to address a question or gain useful knowledge. So I like that one because it talks about the end goal, gaining knowledge, right? Whether it's skills or this perspectives or spatial thinking or systems thinking. And also spatial analysis extracts or creates new information from spatial data. And nowhere is there, I think, a more clear illustration of that than ArcGIS Online, for example, because in ArcGIS Online, you're actually creating a new layer every time you do, every time you run a spatial analytical tool. Or I like to think about this, how would we understand our world? Mapping where things are, how they relate, what it all means, and then what actions to take. That kind of reflects on the geographic inquiry process that many of you are aware of that I'll refer to in a bit as well. The components of spatial analysis, we could break that down. There's a nice poster from ESRI that I've got as a link here, but where, size, shape, distribution, how things are related, patterns, predictions, all that kind of thing is nicely summarized in this digital poster that, of course, you can print and put on the wall back when you're back in the classroom, or share in your digital environment, your learning management system, etc. This is a view of that poster in more detail. It's got some nice colors and graphics on it. There's a long version of the poster and there's a short version of the poster as well that I'll share in a bit at the end here. But the geographic inquiry process, and by the way, the long version of the poster is really not a poster. It's more of a white paper. It's about 30 pages long. It really gets into all of those components of spatial analysis. So nice, useful teaching tool, I think, because you can use that as a sort of a self-assessment. Am I touching on a third of these in the poster? You certainly can't touch on them all, even in one semester or 2 semesters or in a whole GIS program. Perhaps you could get them all in. But it's a nice, again, a sort of a self evaluation guideline. But the poster itself is only front and back 2 pages long. The geographic inquiry process is really central to our spatial analysis discussion, folks, because we're asking questions, right? We're acquiring resources, so I'll touch on data in a bit. We're exploring that. We're analyzing. We're hopefully acting on it. So if we're studying litter in our community, maybe we do something about it. Okay, maybe there are various ways that we can address the problem in a tangible way. So, and of course that leads to other questions. That's the great thing about this inquiry process. Let me ask you a few questions. Is this spatial analysis, if I went to the Urban Observatory, which is one of my all-time favorite web mapping application tools, and I'm comparing, as I'm doing here, senior population for example, Accra versus Tokyo, and I have the students look at the population pyramids for Ghana and for Japan, and seeing that the population pyramid for Ghana is much wider at the base and much narrower at the top, i.e. narrower meaning fewer seniors, then I'm going to use the Urban Observatory tool and have them, okay, your hypothesis then is that Accra should have fewer seniors than Tokyo. And they go to the Urban Observatory and verify their hypothesis. Is that spatial analysis? I submit to you all that, yes, that is spatial analysis. You're looking at a problem, you're looking at an issue, and how it manifests itself onto maps, in this case the Urban Observatory, which has about 100 different cities in it and about 60 different variables, and I highly recommend it. Is this spatial analysis? Let's say you're doing as I did here. I'm looking at the Landsat Explorer tool. That's another web mapping application that allows you to look at historical and current Landsat imagery in different wavelengths, and you can also create these swipe maps as I did here for actually north central Saudi Arabia. I'm looking at the expansion of center pivot irrigation in that country. So I've got that slider bar, as you see in all swipe maps. It's a vertical bar right there, and I've got it sort of slid 2/3 of the way across, and I'm looking at 2000 imagery on the left and 2020 imagery on the right, and I can see the expansion of the center pivot irrigation in a certain wavelength so that I can see the healthy crops growing in a much clearer way as contrasted with the surrounding terrain. Is that spatial analysis? I'm looking at temporal and spatial change. Yes, absolutely. Even though I'm just using a web mapping application and I'm not touching on anything that says analysis, I just submit to you all that is spatial analysis. And furthermore, so is this, another one of my favorite tools. I'm kind of laying some of my favorite tools out before you in the hopes that you'll actually use these if you haven't already. But the Living Atlas has several very nice, what I would consider to be spatial analysis web mapping applications besides the 8,000 data layers that are in the Living Atlas. But this one's called the Wayback Imagery, and it came out about 2 years ago. Some of you perhaps have heard of it. Hopefully you have, but if not, here's an introduction. So I can look at globally at high resolution, as opposed to the Landsat imagery, which does have its use. At high resolution, I can look at things like urbanization of Las Vegas or any other major metropolitan area. I can look at coastal erosion in England. I can look at the construction of the Three Gorges Dam. I can look at changes in Mount St. Helens. So natural and human-caused change across space and time. Yes, this is spatial analysis. And in here, hopefully you can see my mouse, in the upper left, you can actually add those pieces that you've looked at in the web mapping application, and then you can actually create an ArcGIS Online map from the application. Why would you want to do that? You can do that because of our central theme for our workshop, to do further analysis. So you can bring that into ArcGIS Online, and then you can add additional layers. You can run the analysis tools that we'll talk about here in the workshop, and so on. So a lot of these web mapping applications, well, I shouldn't say a lot, several of these web mapping applications, you can actually bring the data out of the application into ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, and again, for further analysis. Now, you can certainly use them just as the web mapping application, so you've got the best of both worlds is what I'm getting at, folks. You've got the application, which you can just use out of the box on the website. No login required. But if you want to dig deeper, you have the option to do that. Oh, I wish I could get excited about these tools, Rodney. I mean, gosh, this is amazing. So this is also spatial analysis. And then what about this one, where you can create, you know how you're in ArcGIS Online. If you go to the share button, you have the option of creating your own web mapping application. And I just implore you to give these tools to your students, right? It's great that if you know how to create a web mapping application, but give it to the students. So in this case, I created a 2D and a 3D compare web mapping application. So I'm looking at landforms. I'm teaching about geomorphology and settlement of this particular valley in western Colorado, for example. And so I've got a compare app that I just went to. ArcGIS Online, I opened those two maps. I went and said share, and then it said, hey, do you want to create a web mapping application, Joseph? Yes, I do, and I want a compare app with the 2D and the 3D. And then I can configure the buttons and the base maps and all kinds of good stuff. Fascinating. All right, folks, I'm going to stop video to share some bandwidth there. So that is spatial analysis also. I'm looking at changes over space and time. I'm looking at land use. I'm looking at elevation. I can calculate slope and aspect, etc. Is this spatial analysis where I've got bird flu over time, and I've got a lesson on this in the GeoNet zone, how to do this, but it is, how do you create these animation bar at the bottom where you can create the slider tool that lets you play with the play button a set of layers. In this case, how bird flu has spread over that 3 or 4 year period across Eurasia and Africa. Interesting. How do you do that? That's spatial analysis as well. You're not clicking on any sort of analysis tool, but you're actually creating a time animation tool, and you're doing spatial analysis that way. Another thing to think about is a simple but powerful way of incorporating some spatial analysis, and that is with the arcade scripting language. This is a language inside ArcGIS Online where you can, and you could also use it in ArcGIS Pro, but it allows you to label things, it allows you to filter things, it allows you to symbolize and classify things with several lines of code. It could be 1, it could be 10, it could be 20, but not huge lines of sets of code. It's short, sweet, and it's a nice way of introducing students to several things, to think like a computer, to think and how they can actually write their own code. But in this case, I've got this map, and I've got, okay, it's in ArcGIS Online. It's in where I'm coming at you right now today in Colorado, and I have in here some major cities. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and turn those on. Okay, let's, cities over 10,000 in population in Colorado. Okay, so there they are. Okay, great. Let's take a look at the table. Okay, I've got 48 cities over 10,000 population in Colorado, and here they are. Great. All right, so how do I symbolize that? I've got it at population 2,000, so this is obviously 20-year-old data, but just for illustration purposes. Okay, and I've got some options here, of course, as you probably are aware, but if not, you're just going under change style or change symbology. And I've got this symbolized as natural breaks with 5 classes, and those are my class breaks right there. Okay, but the point I'm bringing up here is that inside this platform, you can, and so can your students, go over here and say, hey, I want to map the percent of 20-somethings in cities, okay? So this is where that arcade scripting language comes in. I'm going to change the style. Notice I've got a custom expression here. It's not too scary. In fact, it's only, as you'll see here, 1 line. And so what I have in here is I've got, okay, the 22 to 29-year-olds plus the 18 to 21-year-olds. That's why I called it 20-somethings, because it expands a little bit beyond that. But basically, 18 to 29-year-olds divided by the population in 2000 times 100. And then what is this 2 out here? Well, notice that I have a round at the top, at the front end of that expression. I have it rounded, okay, because I want to round the value returned from this expression. I can test it and so on. But the point is, I'm using a very simple arcade expression to actually now, as you can see here in the legend, let's go ahead and pop up that legend. See how I've got it rounded? And so now I can say, oh, well, these bigger circles, and no surprise to many of you thinking spatially right now, I've got a military base down in Colorado Springs, so I've got a lot of 18 to 29-year-olds down there. Boulder, okay, major university, Greeley, Fort Collins, Colorado State University, University of Northern Colorado, etc. Denver, modest amount, some campuses there for sure. But as a percentage, I've got more in certain cities. So all that is done just with one simple arcade expression, and I just submit to you all that that is spatial analysis, and I would highly encourage you to go and try some of those arcade scripts to label things, to filter, to symbolize, to classify, as I've done here. Now, one note as we dig even deeper into this, folks, about lessons and tools. This is a picture. You'll see it tomorrow as well. I can't resist showing this multiple times in the GeoEd conference. But the point is, don't get too attached to the lessons or the tools, right? The tools change, the lessons change, the needs change, educational landscape is changing. So don't get too attached to, I've got to have a lesson for every single thing. First of all, there's a lot of blogs, help files, videos, etc., to help you accomplish all the things that I'm doing today and more. Don't get too wrapped up into I've got to have this body of content wrapped up every single thing into a lesson. Not necessarily, as I'll talk more about tomorrow. But it is an item of concern, and I just wanted to mention it here that all of the things that I'm showing today are actually accessible. So you'll be able to go through these on your own. Also, your role, though, despite the rapidly changing technology and the platform that we're talking about today, and again, I can't emphasize that enough. With ArcGIS Online, it's a platform. It's not just some little tool that's sort of sitting out on Joseph's computer and a couple of other people's computers. It is part of a major GIS in the cloud infrastructure. And so that has lots of implications, one of which is that you can create web mapping applications from it, like story maps and web app builder, experience builder. You can create that swipe, all kinds of things you can create from it. Also, it's connected to all the other software tools in the platform: ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Insights, Business Analyst Web. You can move maps and data and layers from one thing to one software to another. So they're not isolated, disconnected bits. And another thing is that I think instructionally it provides a very nice scaffolding. In other words, let's take the example I was showing earlier. You've got a web mapping application like the Wayback Machine. Okay, you've got historical, imagery. Hey, do we have a satellite image of Gettysburg from 1863? No, sorry, we don't have that. But it goes back a couple years, 5 or 6 years. So you can take those images and then bring them into ArcGIS Online, do some spatial analysis, and you wanted to dig even deeper into landscape change, you could bring that into ArcGIS Pro, where you've got even more tools, as I'll explain in a minute. So you've got this really nice web mapping application, simple web maps, dig deeper with the analysis tools in ArcGIS Online, and even deeper with ArcGIS Pro or Insights or some of the other tools. Okay, so nice scaffolding depending on your needs, your student's age, your student's educational level, right, their experience with geotechnology, etc. But your role is, as I see it, critical, because you're the one framing the inquiry-based questions, the inquiry-driven questions, the problems that you want the students to dig into. And hopefully by doing that, you're encouraging them to come up with their own questions. I know that's a big challenge. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But I see your role as really critical here. Your brain is the most important tool. Your student's brain is the most important tool of all. It's not the buffering tool or the geocoding tool or the swipe tool. It is this tool. Okay, so, and that's what I'm always telling students as well. Yes, learn some geotech, learn some techie tools, but keep thinking spatially and critically. This is the most important tool because it'll keep you tenacious and moving forward and asking good questions. And that's what employers will value, right? Let's have a word about data. I'm going to go and stop video here. Let's talk about data for a bit. And I know, I can't resist. I know some of you are thinking, oh, Joseph, data. This sounds so exciting. I can't even contain myself. It sounds so super boring, but it's so critical, right, to all the things that you and I love, because it's all about the data. Your analysis hinges on your data, correct? And I'll show some examples here where it will encourage you and hopefully your students to think really critically about the data. And what goes into your spatial analysis really affects the outcome. The scale of the data, the attributes, the completeness, all of it. The currency, the date, etc. Okay? Now, I just want to lay out here that this is really, I think, fundamental to our analysis, because we're really in this zone, I think, of one foot in this old school paradigm, but still viable, where we're downloading the data, we're processing it, we're changing the projection, maybe we're adding attributes, we're doing some manipulation, we're joining, and then eventually we get to the analysis portion, the portion that we're starting to do some spatial analysis and running some tools to help us do that, but still thinking critically and spatially, so still using our heads. The new paradigm is you're streaming data in and then you're analyzing it. So for example, you can see here, I'm not going to spend time in our workshop going here, but just one of many emerging examples. You go to several, you've heard about Hub technology perhaps. Hub is a configurable set of tools inside this ArcGIS platform that organizations, for example, cities, counties, nonprofits, businesses, etc., and you've probably seen lots of COVID-related hubs in the last few months. Indeed, because it's a quick and powerful way of getting across a large amount of information and also to engage the community in their input. So lots more about Hub we could talk about. But there are open data hubs, okay? And so, for example, Boulder County, and probably a county or city or regional government near and dear to you, close to you, around the world, have set up these open data hubs. And so the old school, but again, still viable, not putting it down, is you can see my highlight in this left panel below, where you're going to the Boulder County site on Hub Technology, and you're downloading the shapefiles or the geodatabase or the CSV or whatever you want to use in your usually desktop GIS program, desktop connected to the cloud certainly, like ArcGIS Pro, but some sort of desktop installed program. You can download it and upload it into ArcGIS Online, but by and large it's the workflow that I describe here. Download data, you're processing it, then you're analyzing it. But increasingly, you've got this right side capability over here where it says APIs. One of those is, hey, open the data up into a web map. And if you do that, for example, I opened it up, and lo and behold, you've got, in my case, as you can see here, this is the floodplains layer for Boulder County. So I've got the 100-year, the 500-year, and also the FEMA floodways on there. So several different layers inside there. But it's in ArcGIS Online. And I could, of course, save that, share that. I could add my own data to it. I can start running with these analysis tools that I'm pointing to right here. I can actually do that. Wow, that means I don't have to download the floodplain layer. I can just go open it right up, or I can just even get the URL for the floodplain layer and add it to my existing map. I don't have to open a new map. I can open an existing map. Yes, absolutely. That's pretty mind-boggling. I know many of you that are on this webinar right now that are saying, gosh, remember those days we used to say, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we just kind of go out and find data and not have to download and process it all. We could just have it at our fingertips, and then we could jump right to the analysis stage. Now that said, yes, we're getting there, but two things. Number one, as I'll talk more about tomorrow, I really want students to be critical of data. Okay, not just, oh, it's easy to obtain and therefore it's the best obtainable data is not necessarily the easiest, okay? So again, thinking critically about who created it, where did it come from, can I trust it, all of that stuff is very important in my view, and very important role for you as a GIS or related field instructor that's using GIS. So that's one thing to think about. And secondly, I don't want to make you think, and you're probably well aware, but just I think a note to you and therefore your students that we're far from a place where all data that we would ever want to access spatially is at our fingertips, right? Many of you have taught, as I have, in many countries around the world, and even here in the USA, where you just can't obtain the data. It's licensed, it's copyrighted, it may be very expensive, it may not be available, it may be altered in such a way that it reduces the spatial or attribute accuracy, all kinds of issues. We're still far from obtaining the kinds of data. And there are several reports out there that you can find about the hindrance of making wise decisions based, there's still a hindrance because of the lack of data. Now I think the current COVID crisis is showing people, you know what, it is critical that we share these kinds of spatial data sets for people to make wise and smart decisions. So I think, you know, if nothing else, it's opening some people's eyes to, we've got to have data at our fingertips to make smart decisions, and spatial data is a key part of that. So just wanted to mention those two caveats. But think about those two paradigms, and I think it's still wise to have your students wrestle with both methods. Another thing to think about in terms of that new paradigm, as I call it, in obtaining data, is you've got this increasing idea of data services. So many of us have gone through labs. We've created our own labs. I've got plenty of these that are, and probably you do too, where you have the students go out, they go out to the USGS or other sites, they download a bunch of DEM tiles, and they bring them into GIS software, and they create a slope map, an aspect map, a set of contours, and then you have them create index contours, and then at some point they look at maybe north-facing slope versus south-facing slope and look at the land cover on each one. Well, this is an illustration of, you know, okay, that's still a viable way of doing it, but there's also this new way where you, as I wrote about in this long, gnarly URL here, using raster data in the cloud for your GIS analysis, we've got elevation services that are sitting out there in the ArcGIS Online platform. Now, again, being critical of the data, you know, what is the resolution of the land cover and the elevation data that I'm illustrating here, but I'm just streaming the data in this case, to ArcGIS Pro, the elevation data, and I computed an area here along this ridge line, which is the same one we were looking at with the 2D and 3D web map, of where is the slope greater than 50%. So pretty steep. This is a cliff here, obviously. And okay, that data is actually sitting inside the cloud. I didn't download any of that. And so I'm doing some analysis on it. And similarly with land cover in the panel below, I'm looking at, okay, I'm looking at a certain actually scrubland, so sagebrush, etc., cholla and other plants, but mostly bare soil. And this yellow is where the value was 1. I ran the raster calculator on that, and that NLCD, National Land Cover Data Set, is streamed. I didn't download little pieces. Okay, so think about that as part of our analysis. Another thing I think that's important instructionally to think about here is you're using the most appropriate tool set for the job. ArcGIS Pro, for example, has 1,100 tools. And so if you go to toolboxes here, as you're looking at here on the right side here, first of all, on the left side there, you go into it with analysis, the analysis tab, and then you look at tools, and you can look at it in a traditional, you know, some of you have come into GIS way back from the ArcGIS desktop days, and you're used to looking at this big, long list of categories, and inside those categories you can dig down. So analysis tools, and you dig down and you see extract, overlay, proximity, etc. And you can also do a search, which is more common nowadays. You just search for the tool that you want. Okay, 1,100 tools, powerful thing to do for sure. Lots of deep dives and links to the R bridge and links to the Jupyter notebooks and lots of other things that we could talk about, and I'll mention a couple of those tomorrow. But ArcGIS Online, which is the focus today, we've got 45 or so tools in there, and all of them are accessible through this analysis button. You go to analysis and you say, oh, find locations. Well, what's inside find locations? You can find centroids, derive new locations, etc. It gives you enough where you understand what is inside that particular set of tools, but not too much where it overwhelms you. If you want to dig deeper and to look at the full help, then at the bottom of most of those little boxes, as I illustrate here, you have the link to the more full documentation, okay? So the reason why, part of the reason why I wanted to show you those web mapping applications, Arcade, and other things, the swipe map, was that just because you're maybe not necessarily using the analysis button in ArcGIS Online, you've got a lot of options to do analysis, is the point of all of that, okay? And I encourage you to use those. Now, the next section, actually, we're going to actually use those analysis tools on there. And again, if you want to follow along, that's great. If you want to actually do this, I think it'll be a little bit of a challenge, but you're certainly welcome to, especially if you got a couple of monitors, you can maybe open up another monitor and try some of these things that I'm going to walk you through. Just a couple of last bits here before we get into some more of these analysis tools. Analysis creates layers, okay? Analysis creates layers. So if I go to this one that I'm doing over here, and if I sign in, and this is, again, where you would sign in with your university, K-12, community college account, or the KCTS account, if you go there, you're going to get into your account in ArcGIS Online, or if you don't have any of those things, folks, you can always go to, and I always like to tell students this because someday they'll graduate and they'll want to migrate some of their content. If you go over here to developers.arcgisonline, you know, developers.arcgis.com, if I wasn't logged in here, it would say, don't have an account, set one up, okay? This without the developer site, without being logged in, it'll say on the left side, start a free account here. So you get 50 credits a month with this developer account. It's got a lot of nice tutorials for digging into coding, which is not part of our session today, but just FYI. Anyway, so that's another way for you to actually get into these tools. Well, what I'm getting at right now is if you use these analysis tools on, for example, this one that we were looking at here earlier, where we've got I ran the arcade script. If you go to analysis tools, every single one of these things adds a layer. Okay, it adds a layer that eventually end up in your content. Okay, so that is one of the things that I wanted to share. They create layers, and because of that, you need to be a creator, have a creator-publisher role in that account. Oftentimes, and I think those of you that are instructors can relate, you'll get emails from students or someone else or colleagues that say, hey, I don't see this analysis box or this button. I don't see analysis up there. In other words, they don't see this thing right here that says analysis. And the reason why is because they're not a creator or publisher in that account. So they just need to be, the administrator, you or whoever the administrator is, needs to elevate them to being that role in that account. Okay? Also, many of these tools have as a default, use current map extent. The reason why is because in ArcGIS Online, remember it's on the web, right? So it wants to limit what you're doing because of bandwidth. Okay, and so usually that box by default is checked where it says, hey, do you want to do your analysis on just the map extent? Now this is different from the behavior in many of the desktop tools. So it's important to recognize if you are wanting to look at, for example, as I've got a lesson on looking at business locations, and I do a inquiry on 2 different kinds of businesses, 2 different convenience store chains, Casey's and Allsup's, Casey's being centered in Iowa, Allsup's centered in Texas, New Mexico, Buddy Holly country. If I do that and I'm zoomed into Lubbock or Amarillo, it's only going to do the search or the analysis on that area that I can see on the map. So if I zoom out, ooh, I don't see any in eastern New Mexico, for example. So pay attention to that map extent. If you're zoomed out to your whole study area, it's fine to have that box checked. But if you want to make sure, then uncheck it. But in certain instances, you might want to have that checked because you don't really want to do analysis on every single water well in Missouri, right, or every single Starbucks in the North America. So something to pay attention to. Also, on a related note, you are working online and you might have multiple students in either a face-to-face setting or in a virtual setting, and so you want to keep in mind what the bandwidth is of your students, and perhaps that lesson that you're going through doesn't have to have every single, again, feature in a wider area. You might be able to accomplish the same goals with a shorter number of attributes, a reduced study area, etc. Okay? So, naming and folders. I think that despite the advent of GIS into this cloud-based environment, it's still a system, right? GIS is still a system. There are still components. And so don't make it more difficult than it has to be. Be organized. So if you've got, for example, your content, let's do this. So if I go back and look at content, hopefully you are helping the students think about, okay, be organized. Create folders, okay? If you're using certain tools, it creates folders for you. So use those folders. So BA, for example, Business Analyst, it creates folders, and I've got some folders under BA. I've also, if you're using Survey 123 or any sort of field-based tool, you've got a folder that's called Survey Dash and your different surveys. So it creates these folders. I wish we could do subfolders. At this time we cannot, but at least create folders and be organized, and encourage your students to be organized. I know that's difficult because a lot of applications nowadays, it just puts it in a default folder, right? And the students, I think as time goes on, they become more and more used to, I'll just search on my device or in the cloud and I'll find stuff. I'll find stuff that I need. I think there's still an element in GIS about that's not so wise, because eventually, right, you're going to have lots of different files, lots of different media types, and it's good to be organized, even in the online mode, okay? Also, I think, even more than in traditional desktop-only world of GIS, working with the online requires a certain amount of tenacity, a certain amount of patience sometimes with bandwidth and other things. And if a certain tool is spinning, you've probably encountered that, stop it and try it again. Maybe there's a layer that's not available. Use your data seeking techniques in the Living Atlas or other places to find an alternative data set that will work. All those sorts of things that you as an instructor are really good at. I think this is also helping the students to be that kind of, okay, this wouldn't work exactly how I thought it would, and so I'm going to try this. All of the tools also have a credits at the bottom. Right before you run it, you can check credits. It'll say show credits. I don't want you in the instructional world to worry about credits, but on the other hand, I do want students and instructors to be aware of that, because most importantly, I think, is because think about the students' workplaces. They're going to be using all kinds of online cloud-based tools, and their employer is probably going to be paying for them. So just instilling that whole notion with the students that, hey, someone's paying for these services, whether it's Salesforce.com or ArcGIS Online or something like that. And so you, being a good employee, you're going to be a wise steward of your employer's resources, and so therefore you need to be careful about and knowledgeable about what are credits and how are cloud-based services consumed and all kinds of stuff like that. And also sharing, right? You might use ArcGIS Online, especially these cloud-based environments, to instill the whole idea of, I want my students to really understand when to share, what not to share. Not everything they should share outside their organization, right? Maybe they've got some sensitive data in there. Maybe they've got some, there's a variety of reasons. Maybe they're not quite ready for, the masses to see. So really being careful about that. And also, this kind of sounds like, of course, Joseph, but remember, any GIS, not just ArcGIS Online cloud-based systems, but any will divide X by Y, even if it doesn't make sense, right? So you've got mobile homes and tornadoes, 2 layers. If I divide one by the other, is that going to be the number of tornadoes that hit mobile homes? No, it's not. So again, be critical of the methods, understand the data, understand what the tools are doing. I just think that's why we love GIS, right? Because it teaches so many things beyond just the tools themselves. Teaching about, spatial statistics, for example. And then, of course, you've got to, as an instructor, I think, and this is part of the reason why I have such respect for you all, you've got a double duty. You've got to learn enough of the tools and the data and the methodologies in geotechnologies, but then you've also got this, how do I teach with this? When do I teach with this? How do I teach with this? Why? Etc. And in what manner? So you've got to think about your goals of the program, the background of the students, the level, etc.